Hi, everybody. Welcome to Screen Less, Play More podcast. I'm Cynthia, the founder of screenlessplaymore.com, and I am with Melinda Murphy, who is the principal of Southern Hills Middle School in Boulder, Colorado, and she is going to tell us what she has seen before and after a full cell phone ban at her middle school. And she's going to let us know what parents need to know about tweens and tech, and her advice to other parents and school districts on how to implement phone bans, because this is the real hot topic these days in most every school district in America. So welcome, Melinda.
Thank you. Thank you.
So you were a high school teacher before becoming a principal, right?
Yeah, I was an English teacher for about 18 years. I actually taught high school and I taught some middle school. And then I moved into administration in 2006. And kind of having the lens of being in the classroom right at the beginning of the cell phone explosion, where kids were, getting cell phones that they could text on, but they didn't have smartphone capability, all the way to now where, I've got fifth graders that are coming out of elementary, walking into sixth graders with smartphones and full access in their hands. Wow. So I've definitely seen the full gamut of, the evolution of what technology and phones have done to our kids.
So when you were actually in the classroom, were phones problematic at all?
No, not so much, because kids definitely had them, but we were still in the era of, what was it called? Like the T9 texting, right? Where you had to figure out the letters.
You had to press a number like 5 times to get to a letter. Okay.
Yeah. And just the access, I think, that parents felt like they had to kids was still kind of that mentality of, well, my kid's at school, so unless it's an emergency, I won't bother them.
Okay.
And I would say that my last year in the classroom was probably the first year that I really had to tell kids, like, you can't text your parents during class, you need to put your phone away. But it was really interesting. It was like not a problem at all. And then all of a sudden it was a problem all the time.
Okay. And so over those last few years, just even in general, how have you seen kids change?
Their ability to pay attention, to be present, I think is really diminished. What I would call like the social distractions, which are always an issue for kids, that need to fit in and to belong and be connected, is so strong just developmentally. And what we do when we put a phone in a kid's hand is we heighten that need. And so there's not only the need to fit into the present setting, in class where they're working with peers on, whatever the task is, but then we've added the pressure of what's also going on socially outside of the classroom. Mm-hmm. And there's no room to escape that, right? And so it feels to me at least like it really works on that real developmental need to fit in, to belong, but in a really negative way that doesn't allow them to be present with the people that they are with, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
learning what they're supposed to be learning, right?
Yeah.
They just like the engagement went way down, and teachers are competing against, the dopamine hits that you get from a cell phone. And unfortunately, our teachers are not video games. They're not social media, right? Like they just don't have the same ability to connect kids or to engage kids the way that scrolling through TikTok or Instagram or whatever does.
I mean, has that become a problem, that it seems like kids are just bored with whatever the teacher is saying because it's not as cool as their screen?
Yeah, it feels to me like boredom is the real issue. It's really hard to, like, we talk all the time about how to launch a lesson, how to hook kids into the learning. That is like, it's hard. It's hard to get their curiosity raised. And the other thing is that the way that I think, and this is anecdotal, but it feels like when I was teaching, I could hold their attention longer than what I watch teachers do today. And I don't think I was that much more interesting at all. Mm-hmm. I just think I had kids whose brains were able to like focus on a task and persevere through a difficult task without feeling the need for the instant gratification that a cell phone gives them, right?
Yeah.
What just wasn't an option. So yeah, it's a challenge for sure.
Wow, yeah, that's hard. So Boulder Valley School District implemented a bell-to-bell, well, they voted on it by the school board last November 2024. What was happening in school prior to that ban? Like, were teachers trying to just kind of ad hoc do things in their classrooms and have like cubbies, or were they trying anything on their own, or was just everybody having phones all the time?
Well, so they've always, well, I shouldn't say always. So this last year was my first year at Southern Hills. And when I got here, I read the policy, and the number one thing my staff told me is we've got to get cell phones out of the kids' hands. And I've been an administrator long enough to know that if board policy says you can do it, you can do it. And if you've got a supportive staff that will support whatever the move is, you can do it. And then add to that, if you've got parents, like, you're golden. But it all starts with policy. Well, there was a policy in BBSD that technology should have been away for the day. And my understanding is that it was really hit and miss. In some classrooms, teachers were really good about enforcing, I should not see your technology. In other classrooms, kids could get away with, sneaking under the desk, or some of them just had cell phones on their desk. And the teacher is like, well, as long as it's not disrupting, it's not a problem. The research says that even having the cell phone sitting on the desk is a huge distraction to learning, right? It gets in the way. And so the away for the day thing, for me to be successful, meant that the phones had to go into lockers. They literally had to be out of their hands, off their personal being. It's really interesting. I've never worked in a school with lockers, and this is the first time I have. And lockers are awesome in the sense that that's what they do. They create physical space between the kid and the phone. And our kids do not carry backpacks. They're not allowed to carry backpacks. So when we say away for the day, we mean phones are in their lockers. Prior to this year, I would tell you hit and miss. Like, yes, some teachers had cubbies. Some teachers asked them to hang them in pockets. Some teachers just said, as long as I don't see it, it's fine. I'm sure that there were teachers that were probably just not policing it at all, because I don't think they really understood the power of that policy. I don't think they also understood the distractibility that was happening because of phones being in their classroom. And it's a fight. Like, honestly, it's a fight for a single teacher to take on without a collective effort by the community.
And it just must take so much time and so much brain power and so much interruption to the class period.
Yes. Yeah, it's exhausting, and it gets in the way of relationships that I think are really important for teachers to build with students, right? When there's just this constant battle that they're fighting. Like, that doesn't feel good. And that's not what we want for the adults in the building.
Right. So by the time you got there, I mean, obviously, so cell phones were ubiquitous. And for those first few months before the ban, what did the culture of the school feel like? Did you feel like kids just were walking around like zombies with their faces in their phones? Or what percentage of the kids do you feel like had them? Because what age group is this? It's like 6th, 7th, and 8th. So they're
6,
11 or?
Yeah, and the youngest kids coming in are 11. So let's say 11 to 14 is pretty solid. And remember, like, my first day was July 21st last year.
Okay.
So when I asked the staff, they told me that they felt about like 3/4 of the kids were walking around with a cell phone, more 7th and 8th graders than 6th graders coming in. But I would tell you at least half, well, honestly, I don't know a number, but I can tell you there's not a single 6th grader that I've ever asked when I have needed them to use their phone, maybe get a hold of a parent, has told me they don't have a phone. Every kid I've talked to has a phone. So before that, it was cell phones all over the place. The teachers told me that, yes, like, you would see kids, walking through the hallway, phone in their hand, because the teachers that were enforcing no phones in classrooms, of course, they weren't enforcing anything in the hallways. What's interesting is that after school, before and after school, at the beginning of the school year, we had a lot of kids outside the building with, they've got their phone in their hand or whatever, like, phones showing each other stuff. By the end of the year, far fewer kids were leaving or coming to school with a phone in their hand, ready to show their friends whatever was on their phone. Like, enforcing it really had an impact across the school day But it started from the minute they walked on the campus until after they left campus, which was really nice to see, because even when they had some freedom, they didn't go right to their phones.
Right. So there's
Yeah,
kind of the philosophy bled over into their private time.
Yes.
That's nice.
We even had kids going on a field trip at the end of the year asking me if they could take their phones, and their teachers had given them permission, mostly so the kids could connect with each other during the day, right? About like where they're going to meet up and stuff. And I asked them, hey, how did that go? And they said they didn't see phones. Like, so even when the kids were given permission, their use was, I think, far more, they were more judicious, right?
Yeah.
With their use. They weren't just everywhere.
Interesting.
It felt more purposeful, intentional. They understood that, yeah, I don't want to stand next to my friend and have my phone out. I want to connect with my friend just naturally, without the adults teaching that overtly.
Well, when the band started, did you guys explain to the students sort of the thought behind it, of why it was going away? Do you think that's what really helped?
So here's the interesting thing. So I sent out a letter to the community prior to the start of the school year saying that we would be enforcing the BVSD policy of away for the day, no cell phones.
Okay.
And what did that mean? And it meant no smartwatches, no earbuds, and no cell phones would be like out during the school day being used. Kids would expect if they brought those things to campus, they would receive a couple reminders. We would then collect it if we had, a kid who just couldn't seem to follow the rules. And then eventually we went to like, you're going to now turn it into the office for 5 days. And then after that, we told them that they wouldn't be allowed to have their phone at all on campus. And what really worked was the support of parents.
Okay. So
when we did a back to school night, I told them exactly what the rule was going to be, but I also walked them through some of the research, specifically from the anxious generation. And what was really validating to me as like an educator was how supportive the parents were. Great. That's what made the difference, was parents saying to kids, like, absolutely, you need to follow the rules of the school. And if they say you can't have a phone, you can't have a phone. I had parents where I would call and say, okay, your kids, violated the cell phone agreement. They're going to turn it in for 5 days. I had several parents say, oh no, they just won't have a phone. And they just took the kid's phone away. Right. So that's what made a difference. I think it was the hardest for the 8th graders, honestly, because they were used to being able to do whatever they wanted with their technology. Mm-hmm. So the 8th graders would try to kind of skirt the rules. They'd hide phones in their big baggy pockets, all of that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. The 6th and 7th graders, we rarely had cell phone violations. Okay. By the end of the year, far fewer 8th graders were turning in their phone than had been at the beginning of the year. So we were really clear about what the rules are, where the rules were enforced, what the consequences were for not following the rules, and then the why. We spent a lot of time in digital citizenship lessons with kids talking about the impact of cell phones. My school librarian invited an author to come in. We read a book called Accountable by Dashka Slater. Miss Slater came in. She did a kind of a meeting with a group of kids, and then we did a big community event around what had happened with a social media account that had gone horribly wrong, and really tried to raise some awareness around like just the dangers that exist out there because of the access to social media, the constant pressure of being connected, and just what would the world look like if we didn't have the pressure that comes along with the constant access to social media and to your peers through texting or whatever. So there was a lot that was done, and it was a constant conversation through the course of the year.
I think that's just so important, that it's not just, yet another rule, another thing that these teachers are saying. You're doing it for their health and well-being. And once you explain that to them, I think you really get their buy-in. Well, because I was under the impression that actually the hardest people to convince are parents. So you didn't really find that?
Not at all. In fact, I have had one parent I'm dealing with, I have 500 and just over 500 kids, so 1,000 parents, right, involved. one parent complained about the cell phone rule, and I emailed them and said, hey, I would be more than happy to meet and talk through this with you, and didn't hear anything back.
Interesting.
And when you think about like that, not a single conversation about this isn't fair, why are you doing this? I had parents ask legitimate questions about like, what if there's an emergency? Well, we have a phone in the office. The kids are always welcome to use it. No questions asked. Middle of the day, beginning of the day, end of the day. And the kids do. They just come in and use the phone and call mom and dad. No big deal. If they need to get their child, we of course know where kids are at all times. We can get a message to the kiddo right away, bring them down to the office. So when we kind of allayed the fears around emergency communication, I don't know that any parents care if their kid is able to get on social media during the day, right? But they do care about needing to communicate with their kids, especially when there is an emergency. And so we did a little work around the awareness of those and how you opt into those and what you can expect if there is an emergency. Just really try to shore up our communication processes and make parents aware of what we did have to ensure that their kids were safe. And like from my experience, it really allayed a lot of the questions and some of the fears that parents had.
Yeah. We have to remind ourselves, we all went through this whole life without phones just a few short years ago.
We did.
And we all survived, and there was an office phone. And I mean, I guess these days there's not as many pay phones around, which there were back then that you could use. But the things I've heard is that a lot of parents, like you said, are so afraid of not being able to get a hold of their kids during an emergency. And I didn't know if you'd had any sort of first responders talk to parents, because apparently, first responders say they absolutely don't want cell phones involved if there's something terrible like a shooting or something like that, because it's far more distracting. And did you have any sort of that type of information going out to parents?
We did a little bit. We could have honestly done more with that, but we have a really great school safety advocate, and she talked to parents about that exact thing, about how cell phones create a real issue when there is a true emergency in a school around relaying false information. Parents immediately drive to the school and clog up entry points for first responders. In my previous district, we had an issue where we had a lockdown that happened actually prior to the start of the school day. And that was exactly the problem. Like, kids got on their phones, and then there were all kinds of rumors. And then the first responders and the school district was working to allay the rumors that were going around. And that took up time that really should have been spent on the actual emergency. It became a distraction. It also, we had parents blocking driveways because they, wanted to get to their kid. And I understand that. I have 4 kids of my own, but I also know that we go through processes. We work with highly trained professionals who respond very well to emergency situations, and we need to let them do their job. And we create more problems for them, honestly. Especially when kids, because they're afraid it's an emergency, and they'll start speculating on what's happening. Well, this is what I heard. This is what I heard. I heard this yesterday. And then of course the rumor mill takes over.
Right. And as far as I understand, most schools, like my children's schools, have a system of like, I usually get a text and an email if anything is going on, any sort of issue. Oh, a pipe broke, and your kids might be telling you that there's water running down the stairs. And, they have ways to get in contact with all of us. And I also figure, like you're saying, they don't need all these cars showing up. You need to wait for them to say, hey, the meeting place is X. All the firefighters will be over there to meet you. It's a few blocks away from the school, whatever it is. I'm glad to hear, though, that you didn't really have pushback from parents.
No, this community has been so incredibly supportive, and I'm really fortunate. I mean, I work with very savvy parents. They're well educated. They're well versed in like how schools work and the needs of their kids. And so when I told them, when we started the year, and I went through some of the research that had been done, and one of the things I found really compelling was that we're about 10 years out now from the, I guess the onset of the iPhone. Well, we didn't have the research prior to 10 years, right? And so we've spent now time, we really know what technology does to kids' brains. And so my parent community is incredibly responsive to like research and what research says, and not just, anecdotal kind of things, but I think they see it in their own homes as well. And they're real cautious with what their kids are exposed to. And I think we know the dangers of social media. We know what's out there. There's been, some great documentaries done about social media and the impact of technology. And this community is incredibly responsive to that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's helped me a lot as well.
That's good. So yeah, I was made aware of you because a friend of mine has a daughter that's going to be going to your school next year. And she texted me saying, oh my gosh, this principal is amazing. We're at the orientation for new sixth graders. And she's talking about the anxious generation and she's talking about cell phones. So what is it that you tend to tell parents when they're coming into an orientation before they start sixth grade? And what are you telling parents about teens and tech? Not only about your policies at the school, but sort of what they need to know about teens and tech.
I often start with kind of my own experience. So I have 4 kids. My oldest 2 did not have smartphones because smartphones weren't around.
Mm-hmm.
And my youngest 2 did have smartphones. And so a lot of times I reflect on my own experience and what I didn't know, right? Like I didn't know that you should take those phones out of your kids' hands at 8:00 at night, an hour or so before bedtime, to give them a chance to not have blue light from screens.
Mm-hmm.
They shouldn't have screens in their bedrooms. So I always start with like, get your phones out of your kids' heads at a certain time, have a central spot to plug them in at home where you have access, they do not. We talk a little bit about the dangers of social media. One of the things that I did discover that my parents don't know is some of us watched, I think the documentary is The Social Network, right? Talking about the algorithms.
That was excellent.
But I had a lot of parents who didn't know that the algorithm responds to what their kids are stopping and seeing, and then it just feeds more
Mm-hmm.
into that algorithm. And they assume wrongly that their child's social media looks the same as theirs does,
Okay.
right? So they're thinking like, oh, their Instagram is pretty clean. It might have gardening and, in my case, like home decorating right on it. But they don't realize that their kids are being exposed to things that we don't want our kids exposed to.
Yeah.
We had an issue earlier in the year with some kind of anti-Semitic language. And it was coming from kids that I was very surprised. I know their families. I know this isn't being taught at home.
Mm-hmm.
And in talking to the kids, it was coming through TikTok.
Okay.
And the student shared with me, and I share this with parents, right? I watched one video and then there were 2 and then there were 3. And then all of a sudden the TikTok feed is just full of, really anti-Semitic, racial, especially like racially aggressive language. And then the kid couldn't get out of it.
Right. It's hard to change the algorithm once it starts.
Hard to change the algorithm. Yep. And I share that with parents because they don't know. And I try really hard to give parents always the benefit of the doubt. I think parents work really hard to raise really great kids, and you don't know what you don't know, right? And so that's why I start with kind of my own experience. I didn't know what I didn't know, but here are some things I've learned. And then I talk a little bit about, I think what really got me was listening to an interview with Jonathan Haidt, and just like my own kind of anecdotal experience watching kids, watching the pressure of social media. I was a high school principal for 9 years at a really large high school, and an assistant principal for 4 years prior to that. And the number of discipline events, I guess, that started with social media, with somebody saying something, was probably like, 9 to 1. Like it was just out of control.
It would start on social media and spill over into real life during school. Okay.
Yep. The number of places that I found kids doing like drug deals over Snapchat, for example, 9 to 1. It didn't start with a conversation and notes being passed in English class. It started over a social media platform. And so I talk about like the dangers of social media that you don't know as a parent walking in with an 11-year-old are alarming, honestly. Mm-hmm. But I feel like somebody needs to tell you this, not to scare you, but to make you aware, so that you are very cautious about what you allow your child to be exposed to. And then I talk a little bit about the research, and what the research says is that there's really no reason for a child to be on social media. I think he argues until they're like 16, right?
He says phone-free schools, no social media till 16. no smartphone until high school,
High school.
and then
Yep.
like more play and independence in the real world.
Yep. And I think that's really compelling for parents, partially because my parents are also of an age where they didn't have a smartphone in their hand either.
Mm-hmm.
And so they do know the difference between childhood without a smartphone and childhood with a smartphone.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always curious to move like 20 years in the future and see like, well, what does that generation of parents look like?
Yeah.
The parents that I have interacted with have some serious aha moments, and I'm really like brutally honest with them about the dangers of like what I've seen and what I've seen kids deal with as a result of smartphones and social media. And I tell them awareness is everything. If you know, you can be proactive, but if you don't know, you're going to end up reacting.
Mm-hmm.
And that's never a great place to be in, especially when it comes to, our kids. They're our most precious thing. And like I said, I really want to give my parents the benefit of the doubt, and they're trying to raise really great humans. Let's be really cautious about what we expose them to at a critical time when they're developing their ability to connect socially, when their brain is literally developing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their prefrontal cortex is teaching them how to make rational decisions. And like, that's such I guess, a careful time that we don't want to make it harder for our kids than they're already going through socially, right?
Yeah.
We want to make sure that we're allowing them to develop as I think they were meant to develop,
Mm-hmm.
without adding the technology piece to kind of the messiness of middle school anyway.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's already so incredibly hard to be a middle schooler. It's probably the hardest now it's ever been because of this. And it's the hardest it's ever been to be a parent because of this.
Yes.
And so one thing that I think is so wonderful about having just an all-out ban is that all of a sudden everybody's in the same boat, and you don't have to be that parent that is saying no cell phone and the other kids,
right.
Your kids are saying, no, everybody else has one. And it just puts you in a really tough spot. And so at least now these parents all have a community. They know that every single other parent at Southern Hills knows what you told them at orientation, and knows that they're, in theory, that their kids are not going to be watching something totally inappropriate on somebody else's phone at lunchtime.
Yep. Well, and it's so interesting. At the beginning of the year, I had a parent meeting that was kind of related tangentially. So one of the concerns that came up, that is a legitimate one, is around like we use GoGuardian as a filter, and our kids we're one to web. So everybody has a Chromebook. And one of the parents talked about that exact thing, about how powerful it was to know they were all in the same boat.
Mm-hmm.
And he started reaching out when his daughter was a 7th grader. She wanted a smartphone. And he just started reaching out to other parents and asking, do your kids have smartphones? What do you do? What are your rules around use? What parent filters are you using in your home that are working well for you? And he talked about how powerful it was to feel like he could say, no, not everybody has a smartphone because I talked to your friend's parents. And that was one of the things I thought was really powerful in the anxious generation, was talking about how bans can't be effective at like an individual parent level, because the pressure for parents and for kids is so strong to like fit in, to be like everybody else. But when you have a collective effort with a community around it, you can be incredibly successful. And I think that's one of the reasons it's worked so well here, is because it is collective. Everybody's on the same page. They know what the expectations are. They know why we do what we do.
So the kids get to school and they put it in their own personal locker that they have in the hallway?
Yep.
Okay.
That's exactly what they do. Their lockers are locked.
Okay. And so they need to leave it in their personal locker all day long. What happens if they're on passing period and they're seen checking their phone in their locker during passing period?
We typically take them. They know that when we say away for the day, that means the entire school day. Great. Now, I will tell you, does that mean that in every case a teacher's taken a locker or a phone? No, not at all. I had a teacher share with me actually at the end of the year. She had a kiddo who was just having a really hard time and came by. She had her phone in her locker, and the teacher stopped her and was like, hey, what's going on? And the kid said, I'm just texting my mom. And so I think the adults around here connect well enough with kids to know that Like sometimes a kid just needs their mom for a minute, and
Mm-hmm.
that's not a big deal. And we've worked through that, but the kids know away for the day means away for the day. And so those are the exceptions.
Okay.
Those are not the rules. And if there is, like we talked through this one day at a teacher meeting, if there is a kid who's struggling and you're seeing them need to reach out to their parent, like that's a conversation for our counselors. And so let's get that kid connected to counseling. Let's get counseling to do the outreach home, because there's something bigger going on. It's really more like, what does that behavior tell us than the behavior itself?
Mm-hmm. Got it. And you have found, like, basically, were you just very strict at the very beginning and everyone just got the message, and so you haven't had to be as strict going forward? Or what has worked for you?
We were really strict. I mean, we're pretty much really strict all the time. So we started out really strict, absolutely no phones, really clear set guidelines. First time an administrator takes it, the kid can retrieve it at the end of the day. The second time the kid turns in the phone at the beginning of the day, they can retrieve it at the end of the day. The third time they lose the phone for 5 days, they turn it into the office, they retrieve it at the end of the day. The next time they lose it for the entire semester. Or I think we said it had to be a minimum of, like, I'd have to go look, but I think it was like a minimum of 4 weeks. So if you lose it halfway through December, you're not getting your phone back until the middle of January.
So it will stay at the school. You will not even get your phone back to take it home.
No, we'll give it back to you to take it home, but you won't have it during the school day. So what we do is we have a little process where they come in. My front desk person checks the phone in. She has a little cubby. They're numbered, and
this is if you get it taken away from you.
If you get it taken away.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And then at the end of the day, the kid comes in, they pick up their phone, and if the kid misses a day, we add on to the time. Okay. So the kids know, like, and I'm part of this. I have really great kids, but they know, like, that's the rule, that's the way it is. And I will say the other part of this was getting the staff to be really consistent in enforcing. A lot of times teachers are really busy people. They're really well-intentioned. But if the rule is too hard to enforce, then the rule doesn't get enforced. So everybody agrees, right? This should be the rule, but the enforcement is the tricky part. And I told the staff, I'm like, listen, I will take all the bullets for cell phones, people who don't like our decision. I'll do all of that, but only if you guarantee me you will enforce this. And they all said, we got you. And so that was our agreement. And they were wonderful. They did a really nice job of enforcing the rules. And then, yes, as the year went on, if we had the kid that my science teacher shared, is at her locker, upset, texting her mom, then we're now in a place where we can handle that as an exception and, let somebody know, instead of at the beginning of the year where if a kid would have been able to do that, it would have been disastrous. Right. So we've just been really tight and really clear about the expectation, and the kids have they've really risen to be able to, like, follow the rules.
And I'm guessing the teachers probably were overjoyed, right? Because this the enforcement, I'm sure at first made their lives harder, but just in general, what is the response from the teachers? What are they feeling about the ban?
100% support. So I started here, at the middle of July last year, and at my first staff meeting, we were talking about, hey, what would make a difference? And that was their number one thing, cell phones. And so, like I said, I just went to the policy and kind of mapped out what would that look like. And the teachers say huge difference in just how kids interact with one another. The level of drama is way down. The way that kids treat each other. And it's middle school. Middle school is tough and kids can be mean. But overall, 100%, I don't know that a single teacher would say, wow, that's something we shouldn't have done. Yeah. Everybody agreed it was something we should have done, and we did it year one. It will only get easier from here.
And especially, we're all saying middle school is tough. A lot of that is because you're figuring out who you are. Yes. And you need those friends, you need those peers to help you figure out who you are and figure out what you do in this world. And I just can't imagine taking that away and having you look up to a Instagram influencer instead of a 7th grader that you think is cool or a really great teacher. I mean, it's just so vital for kids to just have a real life. And I'm so excited that these bands are starting because it just feels so important. And
Yeah, I would agree. I think that in terms of figuring out, like you said, who you are, you should be able to figure that out without someone telling you who you are or who you should be, right? And social media, I mean, influencers are all around us. They're, even as adults, we know what that feels, right? Like you think your house has to look a certain way, or you have to dress a certain way, or you have to do certain things for your vacations. And then, and we have fully developed frontal lobes,
yeah,
and then you
right.
take that to kids, right?
Right.
And they do not. And so they start getting these really dangerous misconceptions about who they should be, what they should do, what they should wear, how they should spend their time. And, we need to take that away. It needs to be simpler than I think social media makes it feel for kids.
Yeah, because you're going to compare yourself to everyone no matter what, especially at that age. Oh, who's dyeing their hair? Who's shaving their legs and who isn't?
Yep.
Who's going on cool vacations? But at least you're comparing yourself to another sixth grader in your same school, in your same town. You're not comparing yourself to Kim Kardashian.
Right. Right.
Like,
Absolutely.
it's a totally different ball game. So obviously, if you've read Jonathan Haidt's Anxious Generation, you know that a big component of all of this is more independence, more responsibility, more play for kids, more just like real life, old school childhood. So in middle school, correct me if I'm wrong, like you don't really have recess per se, but how do you encourage a sense of play for kids that age when there's not like the jungle gym?
That is such a great question. So when I arrived here, the way my school is set up, there's kind of a courtyard, and there are these 4 square areas that are painted onto the concrete. There's a couple of baskets out there, and then there's a couple of tether balls, and there's a big field. And I remember I came from a high school, right?
Mm-hmm.
Really tight schedule. And I was kind of like, does this ever get used? And my counselors laughed at me. They were like, oh, you just wait. These kids at Southern Hills, they play hard.
Good.
So we have a 30-minute lunch. They will inhale their food as quickly as possible to maximize their time on the playground, which isn't like a playground like an elementary school would have. But we have a big ball cart we wheel out, and they play volleyball, they play basketball, they play 4 square. We have a gaga ball pit. They're out on the field throwing a football around. They need to play.
Mm-hmm.
The teachers are really good about, I think, pushing in a sense of play into the classroom as well. So they try to do things that are very hands-on, very exploratory, project-based. I would tell you, in addition, just teachers, this is one of the things that's so great about middle school. Teachers recognize when kids have had enough. And I've given them full permission. If you need to take 10 minutes to take the kids outside to get some air, do it. Mm-hmm. Green spaces are really great for our brains. And sometimes that's all it takes to get kids back on track. Yeah. And so we try to kind of infuse that throughout the day. But yeah, our kids definitely, they play. And it's really funny. My 6th graders will call lunch recess. And at first I was the one that was like, we don't have recess. And then I realized, oh, they mean lunch. So they still view it as playtime, and they try to make the most of their time, for sure.
Well, and back a billion years ago when I was in school, I actually did go to elementary school through 6th, and then, junior high was 7, 8, 9. But, in 6th grade, you're still at an elementary school and you still have legitimate recess. So, the kids haven't changed. The system has just changed. Right. So every day, like their main time outside is the 30 minutes during lunch. Like they don't have other quote unquote like break times or recess times.
No, they really don't. We run an 8-period day with a 30-minute lunch and 4-minute passing periods. But no, it's pretty much straight through the day, no official recess time. So like I said, we really try to encourage them, like, read your kids. Mm-hmm. If everybody needs to just like press pause, go get some air, do it, and then they're ready to come back and go. Right. But I went to school like you did, and yes, our 6th graders, I mean, in many ways, they are elementary kids. They need to be able to play and run, and it's a huge transition to go from a school day where you have maybe 2 teachers to a school day where you are seeing 8 different adults. That's a lot for them.
Yeah.
So we try to transition them and really try to be aware of, what's going on with them developmentally, how they need to take breaks, and they need time for movement for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've read that even some of the other schools in Boulder Valley, once they had the cell phone ban, decided, we do need to add more social type stuff and more games and fun. And so they added ping pong tables and foosball tables. And they said you just wouldn't believe how much the kids use them and how fun it is and how there's laughter back in the halls, that for a while it was kind of silent during passing periods because everybody was staring at their phones. And they're like, it's so great. Kids are interacting again. The teachers will come out during a break and do ping pong with them. And so I just think it's a really fun, great change. What advice would you give to other school districts who are thinking about this, but they don't have a ban yet and they're trying to decide? Because Colorado in particular, the legislature has now said that schools have to come up with a policy. It doesn't have to be a ban, but it does have to be a policy. So I know specifically the school that my children go to is trying to figure out what their policy is. So what advice would you give to those schools?
Do the research. I think that's the first thing, is do some reading, know what other school districts are doing, what tools are available, become very aware of the resources that are yours first. I taught I was an administrator in Arizona for about 18 years, and I've talked to a number of administrators in my previous district, and they would love, to have the same thing going on. But I think that there has to be a lot of education first, both with your parents, but also with you as an administrator. You have to know, like, when parents have questions, where to direct them for resources, what supports are there to help them with this. So that would be the first thing. Do the research, know what resources are available. The other thing I think is a really clear-cut policy. I think the toughest policies to enforce are ones that say schools get to decide individually. It works much better when a system decides philosophically, here's what we believe about technology, and here's the policy that supports that philosophy. Because then you're kind of all in it together, right? And you can talk from not just the rule standpoint, but the why standpoint. And I think the why is really important. Be very clear about why we're doing this, especially in terms of learning, how it impacts kids' brains, what it does for them socially. And then just a willingness to also offer parents resources, education. I think if you're going to do it, you have to be all in on all facets. So not just from this is what an individual school is going to do, but as a system, what are we going to do, and how are we going to make sure all the stakeholders that are involved understand and know what their role is in that process.
Yeah, great. What about a parent that really would like a cell phone ban, but it hasn't happened yet? As an administrator, like, what would you want to hear from a parent who's looking for change? Like, how can they be, productive and not just complaining or whatever? Like, how would you direct parents to go to, like, do they go to you? Do they go to their district? What should they do if they want change?
I think I always tell parents, start with your principal, always.
Okay.
As a principal, I'm always like, oh, don't go to the district first. Come to me first, right? Tell me what you're looking for. Tell me why you're looking for it. And then as a school, I can start a conversation. If you're really looking for policy change or policy enforcement, most school boards have opportunities for parents to engage with them in a variety of ways. I would look for what those layers of engagement are and get involved at that level, because to make change happen of this scale, it really does take a system to be supportive of that kind of change. I think in some ways I got kind of lucky. I started here just when there was a large conversation going on. People were very aware, and I had support from all sides. And so the change, there was change to be made. There were a few uphill battles to fight, but most of them were with kids, and the adults were on the same page. And that's really what it takes, is adults being on the same page, saying this is what we want for our kids, and recognizing that our kids are still our kids. And we have a responsibility to teach them well and to ensure that they are safe.
Right. Well, the last question I always like to ask everybody has to do with this whole thought of getting kids a little bit more independence and responsibility as they're growing, especially that's a big thing in middle school. So what is a memory that you have of your childhood when you got to be truly independent and do something without your folks around?
I love this question. So I grew up very different than the life I currently live. My parents had I don't know, probably half an acre. We had horses.
Wow.
We always had a cow, a milk cow and a cow that we were raising for beef. And we had a huge garden.
Okay.
So independence to me probably looks very different than it does to my kids in Boulder, Colorado. But my friends and I, and this probably started when I was like 8 or 9, we would saddle up our horses. We would put a lunch in our saddlebags and we would take off for the hills.
Oh, wow.
And it was amazing. And when I think about that, I was like, well, that's probably a little bit dangerous. But my parents let me do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would go off with my friends and sometimes we'd be gone for especially during the summer, we'd be gone for most of the day. And
Wow.
we didn't have cell phones. We were smart enough to know, follow the trail and know how to get home.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was thinking about it, and it was funny, I had not thought about that in a long time, but that was like truly independent, right?
Yeah.
We were cut off from everybody. We had to figure it out. We always had like 3 or 4 people with us. So if anything happened, somebody would have been able to get help.
Mm-hmm.
But that was truly.
How far away from the house do you think you got?
Oh, we would ride, I don't know, probably 10, 12 miles up the side of the mountain. I mean, we would really take off.
Were you in Colorado?
No, this was in southern Utah.
Okay.
And I grew up in a really small town, so everybody knew everybody. I mean, we were pretty darn safe, but in terms of independence, that's about as independent as you can.
That's amazing. At 8 or 9?
Amazing. Yeah, 8 or 9.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And I think in terms of raising my own kids, I was thinking about this question and I was like, what if I gave them that much independence?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's super important that kids do have independence. They also have responsibility that goes along with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when I was thinking about it, I was like, well, I was responsible though. I had to come home. We had to unsaddle. We had to put everything away. I had to clean up, make sure the horse got brushed down, put back in the corral, make sure it had water. I had to do all these things.
And that's a lot of responsibility for an 8-year-old.
It's a lot of responsibility. Yes. And, and I had a dad who also grew up riding horses. And so it was probably because he was so comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
He was, the same way. He'd hop on a horse at 6 and ride down to the fields to meet his grandpa for lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And so it probably didn't feel as big of a leap to my parents as me thinking about the world that I raised my kids in.
Right.
I was like, I don't know if I would let him go do
the
that.
world that your grandpa lived in was probably pretty similar to the world that your dad lived in. And the world is just so different now.
Different.
And I think the catch is we have to remind ourselves, though, that kids are still the same. It's a different world, but they still need independence. They still need responsibility. Because one of the really sad things coming out about research right now of teens is they kind of feel like their life doesn't have a point, or that they have, just nothing going on because everything's done for them. All the obstacles are snowplowed out of their way. And so I think, something like that is just so fun because you feel capable, you feel adventurous. I mean, I sent my niece and my son to King Soopers yesterday on their bikes, and it's I don't know, 6 blocks away or something. And they were so excited. I mean, we've driven there a billion times. They know how to get there. But it was just sure, do you guys want to go get some cookie dough at King Soopers? Yeah. But boy, sending them off on horses for the entire day.
It's so crazy when I think about it now. I'm like, oh, I had a great childhood, but it definitely was probably different than a lot of my kids now in school experience. And I love this idea that we have to find little ways. We have to find, the trip to King Soopers and the world we live in, because even dealing with some kids this year that really struggle or has some discipline issues, when I really sat down and talked to parents, a lot of it was exactly that. What can we give them to feel like they're helping, to feel like they're responsible, to give them a sense of accomplishment, to maybe be proud of? when you really get right down to it, that's what most of our kids want.
Yeah. Well, Jonathan Haidt, that wrote The Anxious Generation, has a nonprofit that he does with Lenore Skenazy and also with play expert Peter Gray, and it's called Let Grow. And if people want to look that up on the web, I think it's letgrow.org. And one fun thing that they do is they suggest that schools do this. And I think probably like late elementary, definitely middle school, is sort of like this Let Grow project where they say, okay, each kid, your homework is you need to do something that you've never done before on your own. And it's like, do you want to walk the dog around the block? Do you want to make breakfast for the whole family? Just something that gives them that sense of being fulfilled and being competent. And then, it also kind of freaks out some of the parents too. I'm like, oh my gosh, because you're supposed to let the kid come up with the idea on their own. And they might say, I want to ride the bus to the mall. And you're like, oh my gosh, or, whatever it is. But it's like, it gives the kids such an amazing sense of independence. And it helps the parents realize, oh, my kid is capable. And so, I don't know if your school does anything like that, but that's something that schools could start incorporating is just like a fun piece of homework of like, everybody, you're going to do something this month that you've never done before, and it's going to help you grow.
No, that is a great idea. I was thinking about like so many things. I have a granddaughter who's 10, and when we lived in Arizona, the park was like basically around the corner, and there was the park. And one day she wanted to walk to the park by herself, and I about had a heart attack. At the same time, I used to let my kids run around this neighborhood like willy-nilly, right? Like they would just disappear with their friends, and I might see them 3 or 4 hours later, and nobody had cell phones, and it was absolutely fine. And so I think part of it is helping our parents allow their kids that sense of independence, because it's really important, and not letting our own fear get in the way of allowing them to feel that sense of accomplishment.
Because the truth is, it's way more dangerous online than it is in real life these days.
Absolutely.
So you're much better off.
And that's what all the research says as well.
Absolutely. Don't let your kid be on Snapchat. Let them walk to the park by themselves. Because one 100%. Is actually way safer than the other.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Melinda. I really, really appreciate this. I hope that this helps people out if they're trying to figure out about a ban, or if they're a teacher or a parent or an administrator. So thank you for your insights.
Absolutely. It was nice being here with you.
Thank you for listening to Screen Less, Play More podcast. If you like what you hear, please tell your friends, and please rate and review us on YouTube or Spotify or Apple, wherever you listen. That really helps other people find us and helps us get the word out. A special thanks to WJD, who does all of our IT, and Neil Penninger, who composed our theme music. Please also check out screenlessplaymore.com for research about kids and tech, some ideas on getting kids outside playing and away from screens, book recommendations, and so much more.